So how is this carbon tax going to affect you, your job and the national economy? Shadow Climate Change Minister Greg Hunt, you warned that prices will go up across the board and jobs will be lost. Give us a specific example of who you fear or what you fear the most from this.
Well, electricity prices will go up, first and foremost. In New South Wales, where we are this evening, electricity prices went up by 18% yesterday on average across the state. Half of that, the largest element, was the carbon tax.
Which is exactly what the government modelled for and is compensated for, isn't it?
Well, with great respect, that's not correct. The government modelled a 10% increase over 5 years. They got that, on average around the country, on day one. And yet the carbon price, the carbon tax, is going up each year, every year between now and then.
Is that right, David Bradley?
And there's another 10% which is due to come when... there's another 10% due to come in 18 months.
That's not true at all. And look, if we want to talk about electricity prices, it's okay to talk about the 18% in New South Wales that comes into effect today or yesterday. But what about the 17% that occurred last year when there was no carbon price? Well, you go over to Western Australia where in the last 3 years 57% has been the increase. So clearly what we're going to experience here from Greg and his colleagues will be to try and pin every possible increase in any price on the government.
So why weren't you, Greg Hunt and Tony Abbott, campaigning in recent years against the power companies for putting up prices that much?
Look, our view has been, and very clearly, and I gave a speech in this city some years ago about gold plating and about the failure of the states to invest in infrastructure. We foresaw and forewarned what was occurring with the stripping of dividends out of utilities by state Labor governments. But what we've got now is a price which starts high, but which increases each year, every year, forever. The $23 goes to $350 on the government's own modelling.
Give me a specific example of the household that you are most worried about being worse off.
Sure. We visited the Romeo household yesterday in Box Hill, Tony Abbott and myself. We met with the family there. They've got 3 kids, a single-income family, about $100,000 of income, so they regard themselves as fortunate in many ways, but they still do it very tough. Their view is that they are likely to be significantly worse off, and forget just the one example.
Significantly worse off. What will be the impact on a family on $100,000, 3 kids?
Well, I'll tell you exactly. The Energy Users Association of Australia said that in New South Wales there will be a $544 increase in electricity and gas prices, and that means that the compensation is blown away before you even get out the door of your house, before there's public transport, before there is a visit to the shop, before you go to the tip. I visited today the Maitland tip with a $35 increase per tonne of waste, and the poor guy at the gate was being abused for the decisions of the government. That's the real world.
Is this right, though, getting back to this family, that a family on that sort of income would be worse off?
Look, in terms of that particular family, I haven't looked at the details of that family, but what we do know is that 9 out of every 10 households will be receiving assistance. A very large proportion of them will be receiving more assistance than we expect will be the impact of the carbon price. And let's give this a bit of perspective. 0.7% is the impact on overall prices. Now, we hear the claims that that's not going to be the case. Treasury's modelled that. The same people at Treasury that modelled the impact of the GST, which incidentally...
And the home insulation program?
Incidentally, they modelled at 2.5%, which is what the increase on overall prices was.
John Hewson, let me ask you about this. I guess it's all well and good to talk about national impacts, a 0.7% increase in prices, but in the end people are going to look at what's happened to their own hip pocket.
Oh, they are, but look, might I just sort of step back a bit from this debate? I mean, this is a natural debate. Yours is bigger than mine, your impact's going to be worse than mine, so on. You expect that in our day-to-day political contest. What we're dealing with here is an issue that runs out the next several decades. We've got to take a medium-term view of what we've got to do to bring down the level of carbon dioxide emissions over at least through the middle part of this century.
Even if there's some pain along the way for some households.
There is always going to be short-term adjustment pain, and there are government responsibilities to try and deal with that. There's no doubt about that, and whether you've got it right or wrong, I think that's a point. But the fact is we've got to put in place a structure and get our own house in order in doing that, such that by the medium term we don't have this problem. And I think globally the trend is there. I mean, the big policy challenge today for the world is to move to a low-carbon society and a low-debt society. And everyone's struggling around that. Look, I heard these sort of arguments back in the 70s and 80s and 90s about cutting protection. You can't cut protection, you can't get out in front of the world, you'll destroy this. I think we did pretty well. We had a boom in productivity through the 90s, largely as a result of the reforms that were put in place in the finance sector, the goods sector, the infrastructure micro-reform. So I'd like to take a more medium-term view. I don't deny we're going to have the short-term political arguments. And the bottom line is we have a problem that is huge, that is urgent, that needs to be dealt with, and it's going to have to be dealt with and sustained. That dealing with it has to be sustained over decades to come. And unfortunately, we don't get much of that in the short-term political debate today.
Piers Ackerman, what do you think about the impact this is really going to have on
Well,
households?
I think, well, back in the 70s, the scientists like Will Steffen were talking about global cooling. Let's get that right for a start. But
He's shaking his head.
was actually.
I don't think I was. Yes.
The scientific community had a consensus that the world was facing global cooling. So, you know, that's where we were in the 70s. What I see here in New South Wales is people like the chaps at the aluminium smelter up at Kurri Kurri who are today out of a job. Now, I read the statement from the company there. They said that there were a number of factors, but what they were looking at in the long term was the carbon dioxide tax that this government was going to introduce that made that...
Well, that's not true.
I looked, the statement is
That's
there.
not true.
The statement is there, David. It's on the web, and I spoke to the young Danish bloke who was out here.
Exchange rate, aluminium prices, they did have a small impact.
But the carbon tax that's what they said in their statement.
And according to the Liberal Party, the jobs at Fairfax gone because of the carbon prices.
And we've now seen the Gillard government running around bailing out aluminium smelters and steel smelters in other states. And remember, this is all borrowed money, and this is pushing up the Australian debt. Now, you ask, what's all this paying for? Well, according to the best guesses, Australia's action may sort of slow the rate of global cooling by a couple of thousandths of a degree. A couple of thousandths of a degree. Now, to me, this seems to be undue pain on the 22.5 million Australians when our major trading partners are doing nothing similar. And why we are in effect exporting coal, it's the basic revenue for the nation, for other people to pollute, and we are running down a manufacturing sector at the same time. Well, it does not make sense.
Well, take a look at what the environmental consequences of this might be. Is it going to deliver what needs to be delivered, and what are some of the alternatives? Stay with us. We'll take a quick break.